Well, hello everybody, and welcome today for the second VALPRO Path webinar on European consumer perception and plant-based proteins. As we have a lot to go through, we'll jump in right into the slides and start the webinar. Screen, yes, share screen, yes. Picture. Moment, I forgot this.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak to you about VALPRO PAT, which is a project focusing on developing new value landscapes for plant protein pathways in Europe. It's been funded by Horizon Europe to the extent of €10 million, and it's coordinated by Teagasc, and the coordinator is Dr. Ewen Mullins in Oak in Carlow. So the reason the project was established was that we recognised that there was a lack of premium supply chains for primary producers of plant protein in Europe. So the majority of their end product or their harvested product was going towards the animal sector as a feedstock. And also there was a large amount of feed, high protein feed being imported in the form of soya to supplement the diets of livestock across Europe. So we felt that there was potential to increase the premium both by developing a high value or a high protein feedstock, but also as a food grade product. And then we understood that society at large is more aware of their choices, dietary choices, and are shifting a bit away from the animal-based dietary sources. And they're also very conscious of their food choices being carbon neutral and being highly traceable. So all of these aspects were taken into account when the project was being. So what we want to do in the project is we want to develop viable business models that take into account all of the actors across the value chain, the whole way through from the primary producer to the end food manufacturer. So we want to look at developing and growing and ensuring that farmers grow the right crop in the right location under the right conditions, and then that crop is then processed and value is added to that crop and it's supplied to the right marketplace to achieve the highest premium possible. So we're looking at very innovative processing technologies to try and generate value from plant protein crops in Europe. And then finally, we want to make sure that once we have our business models developed, that our stakeholders are confident in transitioning towards this sector and bringing into account some of the new technologies that we've developed. So the crops of interest are those that have a high protein content, can fix nitrogen freely from the atmosphere, are very suitable to the European climate, and have the potential to achieve a high premium. So we're looking at lupins and soybean to a small extent. We're also looking at chickpea and lentils. We're looking at peas and beans, and we're looking at peanut. And in terms of the locations, lupins, we're looking at lupins in Germany and Italy. Chickpea and lentils we're looking at in Germany, Italy, and also in Portugal to a small extent. For peas and beans, we're looking at these, the peas across all regions, but for faba beans, we're looking at them predominantly in Ireland. And then for peanut, we're focusing on some large grower in the north of Italy and some growers in Portugal. So what we ultimately want to do is address some of the questions the main actors have across the value chain. So for primary producers, we want to make sure that they understand which crop is the best, both crop type and variety type for them to grow in their location. And then what is the best agronomic advice you can provide them to maximize their yield and their quality. Then in terms of processors, they need to be given confidence that once they invest in a processing facility, that they have the most up-to-date technologies and the most efficient systems. So we're testing some of those technologies at a pilot scale. And then also we want to try and provide a level of confidence for them that they will get a native supply of plant protein and a consistent supply of that. For food manufacturers, it's almost similar in terms of they want a consistent supply of native plant protein, but also they want to make sure that the products that they make are the most viable products to develop a premium on the marketplace. So we're working with all of these actors in various guises throughout the project.
That was part of richer presentation, just to get the general notice about the VALPRO Path project. And for today, we have 3 speakers lined up for you. The first one is from the Smart Protein Project, Elsa Guadarrama, and she will give us an in-depth look at attitudes towards plant-based eating in Europe. From the Giant Leaps Project, Dr. Fabienne Michel, she will give us an insight on consumer acceptance of plant proteins in target groups across different regions in Europe. And from the Kerry group, we'll have Dr. Maurice O'Sullivan, who will give us an insight on what does the B2B market look like for plant protein ingredients and products in Europe. And our panel moderator, who will be asking him the questions, will be Dr. Ewen Mullins, the project coordinator for the VALPRO Path project. For any questions during the webinar, please submit them in the chat, and during the Q&A session, we will ask the presenters. So for the first presenter now, please, Elsa Guadarrama, just to get up, share the screen. Elsa's space, share, and
perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction. And yeah, as mentioned, I will be giving a brief overview of the key takeaways of the recently published Smart Protein Consumer Survey. But before, I would like to introduce who we are at ProVeg International, and as well as the Smart Protein Project. And if we go to the next slide, ProVeg International is a food awareness organization working to transform the global food system by replacing 50% of animal products with plant-based and cultivated foods by 2040. And we aim to do this through several interventions, from consumer education, corporate engagement, and policy advisory. And if we go to the next slide, I'll also briefly introduce the Smart Protein Project, which just finalized in June of this year after 4 years of collaborative work. This project is part of the Horizon 2020 and involved more than 30 international expert partners, all coming together with the mission of optimizing each step of the supply chain. We at ProVeg International are taking the lead on the dissemination of the results of the project, as well as the consumer studies. But if you're interested in knowing more about the project, I would encourage you to go to our website and find out about the results that all our partners got after 4 years of working in each step of the project. And today's session, if we go to the next slide, is going to be centered around the consumer research. And just to give you also a quick introduction, the results are based on a 20-minute online questionnaire. We had 2 fieldwork dates, 2021, 2023, so that we can compare any changes in behavior. And each of the samples had a total size of 7,500 respondents. So we're talking about very robust and comprehensive sample. And we covered 10 of the most important European markets for plant-based consumption. So with this quick introduction, let's dive deep into the results. And first, the most important takeaway, or one of the most important, is that indeed Europeans are shifting away from meat products. We have that more than 50% of European meat eaters claim to have been reducing their annual meat intake, in which we see the majority of the bigger amount of consumers in Germany, France, and Italy. And if we want to understand the motivations behind this change of behavior, based on our results, we see that, first of all, almost 50% of these meat reducers are doing so because of health concerns, followed by animal welfare and the environment. So this is just to mention the top 3 motivations that come more resonant amongst consumers for changing their behavior. Now, if we look at the next takeaway is that the Europeans are not only shifting away from meat products, but they're actually also actively embracing plant-based diets. According to our results, almost 40% of Europeans claim to follow an either flexitarian, pescatarian, vegan, and vegetarian diets. And if we also want to dive deep a little bit on regional differences, we see that Germany, for instance, has the largest flexitarian segment with 40% of the sample claiming to be following a flexitarian diet. In UK, we see the highest segment of vegetarians, and in Austria, we see the largest segment of vegans. So we're seeing here a trend of Europeans shifting away from meat consumption and into plant-based diets. Now, if we move on to the next slide, I also wanted to showcase the demographical differences of consumers changing their behavior. And here it's important to notice that the flexitarian diet actually transcends generational backgrounds, with around 27% of all generations identifying as flexitarians. So this means we're not only talking to the younger generation only, but there are other generations like boomers, Gen X, that are also visibly embracing this type of behaviors, which is important when we talk about communication strategies and products that actually are tailored to different backgrounds. Now, moving on to the next slide, we see that also looking into the future, Europeans are actually open for more. We see here, we wanted to ask, how much are they willing to increase their consumption of plant-based products? And here we found that more than 50% of Europeans intend to consume more legumes and 40% plant-based alternatives. So that's already quite positive, that not only have Europeans done already some change, they want to keep changing in the future. And if we look at the categories that consumers, for instance, are looking for more variety in terms of plant-based alternatives. So if we can just give a quick click here. Yeah, just talking about the top 3 categories where Europeans are requesting more variety. We see number 1 comes with plant-based sweetened snacks, plant-based meats in number 2, and plant-based milks and number 3. So in general terms, there's still opportunity for more innovation or more diversification of these products, particularly in these categories. So now moving on to the next slide, it's also important that we mention also the barriers and the struggles that Europeans have when choosing these type of products. Back in 2021, the top 5 barriers were price, variety, lack of support, taste, and willingness to change their habits. Now, when we review in 2023, we see that price continues to be barrier number 1. Taste became even more of an issue now in place 2. Information now is actually becoming more relevant, so consumers really want to know more what's behind this type of products. And also health concerns are becoming a bit more relevant. On a positive note, we see that variety actually decreased in terms of barrier relevance for consumers, as well as the lack of support. So there are some positives, but there is still a way to go when we talk about taste and information and what really are the benefits of these products in terms of taste and nutrition for ensuring more consumer acceptance. Now, moving forward. We have here an extract of one of our last insight or chapters in the questionnaire, where we really wanted to understand how much do Europeans agree that their policymakers, the governments, should act or support according to the statements that we are showcasing. So here, all in all, we can say that even though Europeans are willing to change, there are also high expectations for public institutions and from the governments to be involved in this transition towards more plant-based eating. For instance, here, when we mention the top three statements that consumers agree the most, we see that Europeans agree that their government should increase standards for transparency in product certification. So we talk about all types of products in the food category, not only plant-based. They also agree that government should remove tax on food that reduces one negative impact in the environment or that supports a healthier lifestyle. We also see high agreement, more than 50% on other actions in terms of supporting farmers for transitioning, but also supporting policies that increase the availability of these products at food services, at public institutions, and in general, campaigns that reduce meat or dairy consumption. So that was quite a quick overview of the results. So putting everything together, the top consumer trends that we learned from this 4-year consumer study, first of all, is that there is awareness of food. Consumers are changing their behavior, either because of health, animal welfare, and the environment. We also see that inclusive targeting might be the next step here into really trying to position these products more appealing and satisfying the needs of a different range of demographics. We also see that there is a high demand for legumes and even more in the future as consumers want to consume this product particularly more, which is on par with consumers prioritizing transparency in certification or also needing more information of what's really behind plant-based alternatives. So consumers are going a little bit more back to basic, whole foods, and relying on this category for a plant-based diet. In terms of categories, we see that there is an increasing demand for plant-based snacks or categories that cater the consumers seeking more on-the-go plant-based options. In terms of experiences, here I briefly touched this topic on the slides, but there is definitely an opportunity here to extend this trend to social settings. And here we can definitely start with public institutions endorsing more this type of products or meals at their cafeterias, schools, hospitals, in order to reassure that this category is definitely the next step in food and nutrition. And lastly, we also found out that it's more than individual change. Of course, it's important to evaluate consumer behavior, but we also see that Europeans in general have high expectations on their governments and their public institutions to facilitate a collective transition to more plant-based eating. And just to finalize, really, I leave you here in the next slide link to where you can find the overall and country-specific reports. So we have an overall European report, but also country-specific that covers each of the 10 countries that we surveyed. You can also find it at the QR code, and I leave you my email in case you have any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elsa, for the presentation. Now, next is Dr. Fabienne Michel. So we will start this.
So thank you for the introduction and for sharing the slides, Susan. And a warm welcome also from my side. I'm going to present you some of the insights about consumers' acceptance of different protein sources that we found during our research for the Giant Leaps project, which is another project funded by the European Union. If you could go to the next slide, please. There you see that the Giant Leaps project is a giant project with a lot of stakeholders. And we want to develop methodologies and data sets and also innovative things to accelerate the dietary shift towards more sustainable and circularity in the food system. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. Here you see how our project is built up with the 9 different work packages. And for the coming presentation, work package 1 will be the one of focus. So if we go to the next slide, you see, yes, that work package 1, it's not only me who looks at the consumer acceptance of different alternative proteins, but also the work of Professor Michael Siegrist and the two wonderful PhD students, Bruno Etter and Kirsten Pronk. And we are situated here in lovely Zurich. That's why I put the picture here. And today it's really nice weather, so picture is accurate. If you got the next slide, you see our main questions for the first survey that we did. So we wanted to know which are the protein sources that are most promising for the application and future meat alternatives. And we did this pilot survey in Switzerland, and we asked about a lot of different sources. So when you click Dusan, you see all the protein sources that we asked consumers about. So now for the methods, you see here that we asked consumers questions on 6 different rating dimensions. So we presented them with one protein source and asked them, how do you perceive or would you perceive a meat alternative based on this protein source when it comes to taste, health, naturalness, environmental friendliness, willingness to consume. And after we looked at all these scores, we found that they are very much correlated. So we made an aggregated acceptance score. And you will see the aggregated acceptance score for the different proteins on the next slide then. Exactly. You see that the acceptance of protein sources for meat alternative is highest still for an animal reference, that is in this case the egg. And afterwards we have chicken and potato and lentils and also chickpeas, which are plant-based sources that are already used, but maybe not as a meat alternative. So we see some potential in these sources. And on the right side, you see that algae, insects, and cultured chicken or cultured beef and pork, they are not very accepted by consumers in Switzerland. And if you got the next slide, yes, thank you. Here you have the QR code to our paper that has already been published. So if you want to know more, please scan the code and check out the paper after the webinar. But then we were not only interested in how these findings are in Switzerland, but we wanted to compare that to other countries within the European Union, as Switzerland, you know, is not part of the European Union. But still the same questions. So what are the most promising protein sources for the application in now different substitutes? So we looked at meat substitutes, at milk. If you click one further, you see that. Yes, exactly. And also cheese alternatives with the different sources you see below. Thank you. Then again, for the methods, we decided here to make it a bit simpler for people to fill in the survey. So they only rated these protein sources in terms of health, naturalness, and environmental friendliness. But again, we made also an aggregated acceptance score, but in the results that I'm going to show you, you see the scores for the aggregated. So here in orange, you see the results for Germany. In blue is Finland. Green is Italy, and purple is for Serbia. And what you see is what was kind of unexpected, that again, potato was very high. We were a bit surprised by that finding because potato is usually not known to have a high protein content, and also it doesn't, but there is some research going on about taking the fraction of protein out and use it for the human consumption. And it seems that consumers are eager to try that out. And then with peas and rice and lentils and also almonds, we have protein sources from plants that are already in some of the products available. And again, you also see that the animal comparison, so the chicken egg, is still quite highly accepted. And again, also the cultured beef and the crickets in this case, they were not accepted by consumers in any of the 4 countries we looked at. Yeah. Then for the milk alternatives, we don't have these clear favorites as we had with the milk alternatives before, but we still see that conventional cow's milk is the highest accepted protein source. And then almond, hazelnut, oat, or coconut, depending a bit on the country, are the more preferred sources for the milk alternatives. And finally, for the cheeses, we also here see that the acceptance of conventional cheese is very high in comparison to the cheese alternatives. And if you have tried them yourself, you probably agree that there's still a lot of potential for cheese alternatives to become more like cheese, taste and texture-wise. So you see, there's not really a clear favorite, but people seem to not really be acceptant of any of the protein sources that we asked. So as an outlook, I can tell you that we are almost ready to submit this paper on the consumer acceptance of alternative protein sources for meat alternatives. So please stay put for that. And we also plan a paper on the acceptance of the alternative protein sources for dairy alternatives in the 4 countries. And our next studies will then concern some trade-offs when people are making food choices. So with that, I very much thank you for listening, and I encourage you to follow us on the social media and keep up with our research. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabienne, for a great presentation. Next up is Dr. Maurice Sullivan. Just a moment. Isn't it sharing? No. Okay. There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Dusan, and welcome everyone and good afternoon. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of, I suppose, the plant-based food and alternative protein market from an industry perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, so just before I get into that, I work with Kerry Group, and we're an international leader in the development and manufacture of innovative taste and nutrition ingredients. And we use our insights, innovation, and technologies. And we partner with our customers, and our mission is to create healthier, tastier, and more sustainable nutrition solutions, so that our customers can maintain their good health, but also while reducing the environmental burden on the planet. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're a B2B company. We have an 8 billion revenue, and our ingredients reach 1.25 billion consumers in the food and beverage market. And we provide, I suppose, balanced and sustainable nutrition solutions. Our business model is, I suppose, globally connected, locally led. So we have 137 manufacturing sites and 70 technology and innovation centers across 50 countries. We have over 21,000 employees and over 1,000 R&D scientists working for the company. So next slide, please. Okay, so just before I get in, I just want to know, we've seen that, some really interesting information in the previous presentations, and at a B2B level, it's still a very consumer-led approach where, we're all trying to give the consumer what they're looking for. And plant-based food is rapidly growing, but it's facing, formidable challenges when it's trying to replicate the taste, texture, and nutrition of, I suppose, animal-based products. And we see some challenges recently, and food formulators in the B2B sector are really looking for new ingredients, new technologies, innovation in terms of manufacturing processes. And as you know, I suppose the focus on alternative proteins is changing towards, you know, enabling technologies to meet these challenges from a taste, a texture perspective. And if you can solve the problems at a B2B level, then it allows our B2C customers, and their products to grow, with their full market potential. So next slide, please. So Kerry also, we also do our, proprietary, research in terms of the market, and we've done a study recently in Europe, 7 of the most strategic countries, and over 10,000, and we targeted specifically plant-based consumers rather than general consumers. These are people who actively seek out plant-based products, and these are some of the key drivers that have shaped the European plant-based consumer landscape. First one is sustainability, but that's not enough anymore. We know that sustainability now is a given in terms of plant-based. Health and nutrition, that's another key driver why people choose plant-based, and we know that 67% of European plant-based consumers are influenced by health claims. Taste is probably the biggest driver, and it overshadows all the other drivers in terms of why someone will adopt a plant-based diet or why someone will reject it. And it's really we've seen some challenges especially in the meat alternative and dairy alternative markets in terms of taste, and this needs to be addressed if we're really going to realize the full potential of moving people over more to a plant-based diet. The other people perceive plant-based products and plant-based proteins as more nutritious, but if they see a very long ingredient declaration, then that can upset that perception of being healthier. And we've all seen, I suppose, the discussion that's happening and ongoing around ultra-processed foods. And if something has a long ingredient deck, then it's more likely to be, the perception is that it's been ultra-processed. And finally, cost. Cost is another, factor that has been a barrier to, I suppose, the more widespread consumption of plant-based foods. And studies have shown that plant-based, you don't need to be cheaper, but you need to be on parity with animal-based. And consumers don't want to be penalized for doing the right thing. But up till now, a lot of the plant-based products have been at a significant premium over the animal alternatives, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. So just to kind of talk about the state of the market at the moment, this is a good schematic here. We see that consumer behavior is shifting, as plant-based becomes more mainstream. And there's a company called Gartner, and they're a consultancy company, and they work with businesses to track technology trends and also to help them to develop innovation faster. And they have what's called the Gartner hype cycle. And this is a useful illustration, I suppose, to show the current state of the plant-based market. And it breaks the consumer behavior up into numerous different sections or segments. And the first one is called the technology trigger, and that's where a new innovation sparks the consumer interest. And then, we see expectations rapidly increase because often, hype driven by the media and also by stakeholders can often overshadow the reality, and the consumers are ended up with, unrealistic expectations. And then we see that, expectations can decrease again as the consumer realizes that there's a difference between the reality of the products and the hype created, and skepticism can come in a little bit. And also at this stage we see that the media can often predicts the demise of the technology. So then the expectations drop, and you land in what's called the trough of disillusionment, where expectation hasn't met with reality. And I think the And some of the plant-based products are in this phase today. Some are further up the slope. The next phase is where consumer expectations start to increase again. It's called the slope of enlightenment. And this is where, you know, consumers reset their expectations, but also producers start addressing the consumer feedback in terms of the challenges. And eventually, a new generation of products will come on the market. And you know, they used to be, you know, incrementally changed based on consumer exceptions, and then the technology or the products will go mainstream. And I think different, you know, maybe meat at the moment is down at number 3, whereas some of the plant milks have seen a lot of growth and they're further up the slope and maybe moving towards the plateau of productivity where they're going mainstream. Next slide, please. Okay, so then just talking about, you know, alternative plant proteins, and we've seen in the previous presentations that, you know, there's a lot of products out there and the consumers are aware of these products. But from a B2B perspective, you know, there's plenty of proteins on the market at the moment. But, you know, the market is looking for differentiation. There's some key challenges and you know, taste, functionality and application, and cost and use are probably the biggest ones at the moment from a B2B and even a B2C perspective. And new products coming on the market really need to address those. If you know, when we talk to our customers and we bring something new, they want to see that that's adding some value to them and it's addressing some of the challenges they're currently facing with the existing products in the market. So taste, functionality and application, and cost and use are probably the main drivers, and they'll be I think what will make or break a lot of the plant-based products and plant-based alternative proteins coming on the market. The other, I won't go through all of them, but they're all things that can be figured out. If something, you know, addresses taste, functionality, cost, then I think the rest of it will the safety, supply chain, consumer perceptions, history of use, regularly, they'll all come online because there'll be momentum behind them. And I think it's really important to understand that it's not more types of proteins, it's actually proteins that deliver what the consumer is looking for. Next slide, please. So here, this is a nice overview of not all, but some of the products that are currently in the market. And I borrowed this from the Good Food Institute, and they've looked at the different, I suppose, you know, parameters or considerations and created the different proteins. And this is constantly changing, but it's still a pretty good reflection of where things are at the moment. And if you look at the first 3, soya, pea, and wheat, you know, these are probably can be classed as the benchmark proteins in the market, and they're the ones that are most wide stream. It's interesting to see that those 3, you know, they're classed as having a good cost per kilo of protein, and that's probably why they have, you know, made such a penetration to the market. They also, you know, compared to the other proteins, they've got relatively speaking, they've got a good functionality. But when you consider that, you know, a lot of the products in the market, plant-based meat, plant-based dairy alternatives, have been made using these benchmark proteins, and still they're facing challenges in terms of cost, in terms of taste, in terms of texture. It kind of shows you that the challenges are still there, and some of the emerging proteins need to also address those challenges because, you know, sustainability isn't enough, novelty isn't enough. It needs to really add value and address some of the challenges. Next slide, please. Okay, so then I could spend the whole hour talking about this slide, but you know, again, it's, you know, we know now what, you know, clearly what the consumer is looking for. They're looking for better tasting, more functional, you know, at least cost parity with the animal-based products, cleaner labeling, you know, improved nutrition, or at least nutritional parity with some of the products that are being, you know, where the alternatives are being offered. And there's a number of different, I suppose, areas here where there's a lot of innovation going on. And I suppose, you know, some of the previous ones today, the presentations on the VALPRO and on the, you know, from Fabienne and Elsa have been around, you know, protein sources, and that's still key. And you know, there is more and more protein sources coming. There's lots of activity. But again, they have to add value. They have to solve the issues of the market. So we see more every day. We see new plant proteins coming from different sources. There's plant breeding, where they're looking at using strain selection to increase the protein level or even improve the taste of plant proteins. Fermentation, which is biomass fermentation using bacterial or yeast. That's a very interesting technology, because it's kind of what's a relatively low cost of entry in terms of some of the other technologies. Fermentation resonates well with consumers, and also it's very efficient. Precision fermentation is an area that there's some really interesting stuff going on there. Everyone is looking at this to see where this is going. It's got the potential to address some of the functional challenges in terms of non-animal functionality, but it's still early stage. The market is looking to see, can it address some of the scalability and cost challenges that it needs to address to become mainstream. AI modeling, looking at proteins, using AI to target proteins in plants to see, could they do the same functional as egg or milk proteins. And then you have the waste stream valorization, which is really a key area. And there's a lot of activity going on in the startup landscape there, because you can add value to the waste stream. It's got a really good story, and you're not looking at growing more. It's there already. It just needs to be re-diverted back into the food chain. Protein modification is an area there's a lot of work going on. All of the the primary manufacturers of ingredients are looking at these. Kerry does a lot of work in this space. Physical modification around air classification, or milling is being used a lot. Hydrolysis, using enzymes to make the protein more digestible, more stable, more soluble. Fractionation. Most of the plant proteins have different fractions. Some are more functional than others. If you can pull out the ones that are functional, then obviously they may work better than using the protein in its entirety. Different extraction techniques, and we see particularly CO2 and other extractions to address taste and reduce fat content. And then fermentation, we see a lot of startups are looking at using fermentation to change the texture and functionality of alternative proteins. In application innovation, I think that's where a lot of the activity has gone on in terms of the B2C, using other ingredients. We've seen, combinations of plant protein and starches and hydrocolloids where they're trying to address functionality. And obviously that's what's working, but the downside is you can often end up with a very big ingredient deck, and that can be a challenge for consumers as well. Flavor masking, if rather than trying to address the flavor in the protein, can you put something in that will mask the flavor? And Kerry does a lot of work in this area, and it's an interesting area, and it's a really good enabler to address some of the challenges. The texture, that's often an issue in alternatives, and there's products. Can you make the texture more juicy? Can it be the mouthfeel, viscosity? So that's, if you can do that, then it addresses some of the challenges that may not be delivered by the alternative protein and so on. And in hybrid, there seems to be more focus in hybrid systems where you're combining, I suppose, dairy and or not dairy, but animal proteins and plant proteins. And again, it's kind of walking before you run in terms of, it addresses some of the challenges in terms of taste, in terms of cost, also in terms of nutrition. But it's a tricky one because I think the market struggles with where to position hybrid products, and it's interesting to see how this evolves in the coming months and years. And finally, the innovation in food processing. There's a really lot of work going on here in terms of new innovative ways to process food to address some of the challenges. And we've seen in the meat side a lot of extrusion technologies have been developed to give you fiber, to give you texture, and like the holy grail is whole muscle, and there's a lot of work going on around trying to make whole muscle look, from plant and alternative proteins, behave similar to the animal versions. Then there's other heat treatment, ohmic heating, shear cell, 3D printing, pulse electric field. This is not an exhaustive list, it's just some of the areas, but it's a really exciting area, and there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of potential. And I think I think we've seen that the whole journey in plant-based is going to take a bit longer than people anticipated. But I think it's really, you know, creating a lot of opportunity for innovation. Next slide. So I think, you know, there are challenges, you know, but I think that we know what the consumer is looking for. We just need to figure out how to give them that, and there's lots of opportunity here, and I think everyone on this call has a role to play in that journey. So I think you know, it's been, so thank you for your attention, and then look forward to any questions you might have in the question and answer session coming up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maurice, and thank you, Elsa and Fabienne. So if I can ask you to put on your cameras, please, and we'll go through a few questions. My name is Ewen Mullins. For everybody, I'm the coordinator of VALPRO, and you're very welcome this afternoon. So three very interesting presentations. So I have lots of questions here, and obviously attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. We've about 13-14 minutes left on the time for the webinar, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. I think a common theme through the two presentations from Elsa and Fabienne, and Maurice, you said it as well. Basically, we're all trying to give consumers what they want. And yet, Elsa, I think you pointed out that there was, on the struggles for consumers, one of them was that there was not enough information for consumers. So we seem to be in a bit of a kind of a situation where the consumer wants more information, but yet it could be argued that, is there not enough information out there, and is it a perception issue about some of the problems, Maurice, that you think consumers have? Are their expectations realistic, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think, you know, there's education needed, but also there's a lot of conflicting messages flying around, and I think with that needs to be consistent. You know, we're seeing that, you know, plant-based has more sustainability, more health-based credentials in terms, but then you see the whole discussion around ultra processing, and the consumer suddenly is, you know, is where does this fit? And it's creating uncertainty, because, you know, it's eating into the credentials, and I think, you know, that's something that needs to be addressed. I think, you know, there's a lot of you know, different messaging, and I think the education side, governments have a role to play. I think academia and research, the food industry definitely has a role to play, but I think consumers often are more will look at what's coming from, you know, non-vested interests in terms of government or academia, and rather than what's coming from the food industry. But I think we're all trying to do the same thing, and education is key. And like, one of the things that I often think about in terms of, you know, education is, you know, we're talking today a lot about protein, and in Europe, you know, the health claims around protein are totally disconnected to other regions. It's based on grams, which doesn't really tell you what you're getting, and it's based on calories. No one, protein is way too expensive to consume just for calories, whereas in other regions, it's linked back, the claims are linked back to the amino acids, essential amino acids. And I think that's a miss in Europe, because I think the consumer, you know, there's lots of different messaging around how many grams of protein the consumer should consume, but there's a lot of differences in the different types, and I think it's something that, you know, it's a miss, I think, in terms of the whole regulatory environment in Europe. Yeah, very good. Elsa, I don't know if you want to come in there, I suppose, in regard to the education side, because to be fair, your survey was very comprehensive. You know, you must have been very happy with the response rate and the numbers of people surveyed as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think there is enough information out there. We just need to get it to the right people at the right place. No, and I think one of the things that companies are doing now is really working around their product packaging. You know, really trying to ensure that they're certified with trustworthy, well-known certifications, that they're putting their amount of protein, nutrition, and vitamins, and so on. So I think that's already a good way to start or go with. At least here in Germany, where I'm located, we've seen quite quickly response for companies actually doing this, not really trying to ensure that their products are as informative as possible without being too overwhelming, because that's also important. No, you don't want to overwhelm consumers with so much information. So really, the product packaging can play an important role when making the decision. But looking at the overall spectrum, I think I also mentioned it, that public institutions definitely play an important role for endorsing that this is the right way to go, and this will also ensure consumers and enable more trust on this type of products and diets.
All very important, yeah, absolutely. Fabienne, your results were very interesting, and I suppose it probably wasn't too surprising when you showed the acceptance rates for insects and cultured meat was down towards the lower end. Why do you think that is? And I suppose more importantly, looking ahead, how do you think that will change?
Well, first of all, I think it's just because in Europe we are just not used to eating insects. So we have some kind of food neophobia, so the fear of new things that we are not familiar with. And also a disgust factor that comes into play. You eat something that you otherwise think is, not very nice. You don't want that in your kitchen. Why would you want it on your table?
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of that, does that mean it's just a timing issue, that over time consumer perceptions will change in regard to these sources, and that over time uptake may increase?
It could be, but I doubt it, because we have this innate disgust response to things that we find disgusting, and insects are just one of them. So in the real insect form, I doubt that it will be successful on the market. Maybe if you make a powder out of it and put it into products, then that might be an idea.
An option. Yeah.
Or if you use it as a feed for animals and then use these for animal consumption, that's, in my eyes, more realistic than having whole Europe eating crickets.
Yeah, very good. Maurice, I think it was your second last slide where you showed all the different food processing techniques and systems that are in play at the moment. A huge amount of things going on, as you said, we'd all be familiar with it. But where next for plant-based and alternative proteins do you see things going? Your Gartner hype cycle, I haven't come across that before, but it was fascinating because it seems to capture the picture very well, and you have, the plateau at the top. But obviously all these systems and food processing approaches are going to deliver maybe new products or new ingredients or new processes. So, if you had to look into your crystal ball, what do you think we'll be seeing in 10 years and 20 years time?
I think there's two elements. One is, that slide where all the work going on to kind of address the challenges in moving, I suppose, plant-based closer to consumer expectations, and I think that will continue, and I think there's some really interesting stuff going on. But I think, to step back, a lot of challenges are kind of self-inflicted. We're trying to match animal protein using plant, whereas, and that's where Western, most of the world have been eating plant-based for years, and they're not trying to mimic. They're just eating it for the benefits of plant, and I think that's something I think the food industry is looking now to see, should there be more focus on consuming plant for the benefits in its own right, as well as obviously alternatives but if putting all kind of the emphasis on matching, you're setting a very high bar, and if you don't meet that, then the consumer, you see the disillusionment set in. So I think there'll be work going on in addressing those challenges, but also I think the whole approach to plant should kind of needs to be looked at in terms of hybrid. It's hybrid, and mixing the two. If your key focus is to reduce and produce more sustainable food, if people aren't willing to take the most sustainable option, which is 100% plant, then surely a compromise where you maybe still have a more sustainable product, but combining the benefits, that's an interesting approach as well. And I think that's something that makes a lot of sense technically, nutritionally, but I think the market is struggling to see where it fits in terms of positioning.
Yeah, very interesting. The hybrid approach. Elsa, in terms of your top trends that you had there, you had inclusive targeting, which is an interesting approach, but obviously it's for a particular demographic of society. And is there, from the plant protein space, is this already happening? I mean, I'm assuming it is in regard to like the sports, beverages, etc. But you obviously see a greater role for that. You're just on mute there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, to make reference to my location in Germany, we're already seeing companies developing plant-based alternatives for kids, for instance. So there's definitely might be the next category that's gonna grow quite a lot, because at the end of the day, if you have parents that already eat their products, but they can't share them with the kids, then that's already kind of an issue. So they're really trying to kind of keep this family relevance in terms of products. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, we need to really, look at the spectrum. Also, based on our results, we saw that the majority of people that want to change their behavior is actually the older generations because of health. And it makes sense, right? I mean, you start to take care more of yourself, exercising, but also by what you eat. So this is also relevant for the plant-based alternative world to consider, because so far it has been very targeted to younger generations, which are the more open to try novel foods, new products. But then we need to consider also the rest of the population if we want to achieve this mass adoption, right? And this mass transition. So of course needs to be inclusive.
Yeah, very good, Elsa. Thank you. Fabienne, there's a very specific question in there from Fritz. You might have seen it in the chat. Basically, is entomography, which is insects for human consumption. Thank you for explaining that, Fritz, because I probably might have missed that, the definition, what it is. But is that legally accepted in Europe?
So EFSA declared that some insects are safe to eat. So, for example, the mealworm and also the darkling beetles, they are safe to eat, and thus they are allowed to be put on the market in the EU, but not all of the insects. And of course, there are regulations under which conditions you need to grow the insects.
Okay, so it's a growing process.
It's still novel food regulation, yeah.
Yeah, very good, very good. So I have loads more questions to ask, but I'm afraid we've run out of time, unfortunately. But I think it highlights the need for maybe more of these webinars. So before we end the session, Dusan, can you just please put up the last slide? Within VALPRO Path, you can learn more about it at our website, valpropath.eu. And we just have 2 active questionnaires at the moment. One is a consumer acceptance questionnaire, and the other one is a very specific one on intercropping. We have a program of work in our project on intercropping. So that's intercropping of legumes to get, ideally for the farmer, more added value potential there. So if you know, or if you're involved in the production side, that questionnaire, we'd love you to take just 2 or 3 minutes to fill it out, and that would be much appreciated. I think the overall message from today is that there's an awful lot of work underway, both in academia, public sector, and obviously industry. And in addition to that, there's an awful lot more work to be done. The field is obviously extremely exciting with the advancements being made. And then it's that lovely blend of social sciences, biological sciences, marketing, the whole lot put in together. So many challenges ahead, but indeed exciting times ahead. To end, I just want to say a sincere thanks to Maurice O'Sullivan from Kerry, Elsa Guadarrama, apologies, from Smart Protein, and Fabienne Michel from Giant Leaps. 3 excellent presentations. And I'd want to thank you, our audience, for taking the time today to listen in and engage. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.